The two things that I learned on that No Lost Causes campaign, on that most marginal of all political issues, right? I mean, try telling somebody, that you meet at a party or something that what you do for a living is that you're an AIDS in prison activist, right? You can literally see their eyes roll back in their head with dread and boredom and anticipation of what you're going to say next. But I learned two things on that campaign. Number one, when they can peg the exact organization that you work for at 30 paces, that means that organization is doing something right. Number two, if something is really honestly indefensible, it can be defeated. The people perpetrating that indefensible thing will want you to think that what they are doing is inevitable. They will want you to think that it cannot possibly be changed or fixed, that it is the way it has to be, that that is the way it's gonna be. They will want you to think those things, and it's not true. An indefensible practice or policy is, in America, vulnerable. And I'm not saying that bad policies inevitably get overturned. If that were the case, it would not be illegal to make sangria in Virginia. It's true. There is a law on the books in Virginia which says you can, by law, cannot serve a beverage that mixes wine with spirits. No sangria in Virginia. If I was arguing here that bad policies inevitably get overturned, I would not be able to explain to you why it is that we ban drug offenders from lots of types of legal employment post-prison, thus ensuring that they will have to make a living doing something not legal that we already have evidence literally beyond a reasonable doubt that they know how to do. I don't mean that dumb policies, that bad policies inevitably fail. I mean that indefensible bad policies can be defeated. They're vulnerable, they can fail. And the way you can tell a policy is indefensible and not just a bad policy is when the people who are arguing for that policy make arguments for it that make no sense, that have nothing substantively to do with the thing that they are ostensibly defending. In Alabama, for example, on this No Lost Causes thing, the ostensible reason for segregating HIV-positive prisoners was to prevent the transmission of HIV among prisoners. Despite that ostensible justification, the prison was willing to integrate auto shop, which I used to call the Sharps room, right? This is the place where prisoners use heavy machinery, where there is an ample supply of sharp metal things and a to-be-expected history of bloody injuries. They were willing to integrate auto shop. They were not willing to integrate chapel. I'm no expert, but has considerably fewer sharp metal things and injuries in its history, despite the rather morbid stigmata-based art at the limestone prison chapel. Chapel couldn't be integrated, but auto shop could. And ultimately, we found out that was because the instructor at auto shop was educated about HIV, and he was personally unparanoid about the idea of there being prisoners from the HIV unit in with prisoners from the rest of the prison in his classes. So the warden and the corrections commissioner were willing to let that go ahead, but they said, chapel? No, chapel couldn't possibly be integrated because it's chapel. At this point, if you have an indefensibility meter, it should be redlining. The telltale sign of an indefensible policy, as opposed to a merely dumb policy, is, I believe, the sputtering irrelevance of the arguments advanced in these policies' favor. The indefensibility meter has also redlined for so many of the policies and practices that have been keeping our Constitution and our national honor up at night lately. How did we get into this mess where we have so much cleanup work to do? Well, you don't end up with an indefensible policy because somebody talked you into it. And this is strategically important. At the end of a real debate, if you do have an actual functioning real debate, nobody decides to side with the point of view that can't be defended. You end up with indefensible policies through means other than honest debate. We never had an argument. We never had an honest debate in this country about, for example, invading Iraq. We never had an argument, we never had a debate about letting the government listen to all our phone calls and read all our emails and monitor our banking and our web traffic all without a warrant. We never had an argument, we never had a debate about reverse engineering our soldiers' training on how to endure torture at the hands of a barbaric enemy so we ourselves could practice barbarism against our prisoners in the name of the United States of America. We never had a debate, never had an argument about sending bombers to Afghanistan to drop bombs while we sent bombers to Pakistan with a bow around them and a bill of sale hanging off the landing gear. There was no debate, there was no argument about the former president using signing statements to unilaterally nullify the power of the United States Congress. There was no debate, there was no argument about hiring private for-profit armies to replace and interfere with and ultimately neuter our own military capacity. And when I say there was no debate, no argument about those things, I don't mean to say there was no dissent, that there was no protest against these things. There is, and there was, and there has been a robust opposition to every one of those policies, even if that opposition has not always had the most articulate or brave or sometimes even cogent representation in Congress. I am proud to have been a very small part of that opposition, both as a pundit and as a member of the ACLU. When I say there was no debate and no argument about this stuff, what I mean is that we never had an honest explanation from the administration that put these policies in place. We had no honest argument or explanation from them about why they wanted to do this stuff. On the war, we did not invade Iraq because Iraq had nuclear weapons on a hair trigger, weapons of mass destruction on a hair trigger alert. We did not invade Iraq because our government is so devoted to the United Nations that if any country violates a UN resolution, we will unilaterally invade that nation and overthrow its government. We did not invade Iraq because Saddam Hussein was a bad man, or because he gassed the Kurds, or because his regime tortured prisoners in a place called Abu Ghraib prison. When I say we did not have a debate or an argument about Iraq, what I mean is that the people who wanted this war still haven't told us why they wanted it. I've got my own theories about that, probably best discussed in the bar. But imagine them taking this argument to the American people, honestly, and having a real debate over it. I mean, imagine Bush giving a big speech to the American people just a few months after 9/11 to say, friends, America is going to invade and occupy indefinitely a country in the Middle East that has no known links to terrorism or to 9/11. We're going to take our hunting for bin Laden units out of Afghanistan to go do this other thing instead. I just think this is a good time to start occupying a Middle Eastern country. Because we'll feel more comfortable squatting on other people's land that's got oil under it instead of just buying oil on the global market like normal countries do. Can you imagine what would have happened if George Bush or Dick Cheney had actually just made that case to the country? It would have seemed like a joke. Because that rationale for invading and occupying Iraq is indefensible. So they wisely never presented that explanation and argument to the American people. They knew it was indefensible on its own terms, so we got all the bullpucky explanations instead about gassing the Kurds and everything else, none of which turned out to be the reason why we went. On eavesdropping, another example, they said that they needed power to surveil terrorists, right? But the FISA court, the old system, never turned down any of the applications for warrants to surveil terrorism suspects, or anyone else the government ever asked for a warrant to surveil. This court was not in the business of saying no. In the old system, if time was of the essence, the government could even go ahead and start the surveillance on their own and then get retroactive approval from the FISA court within a couple of days. Congress, after 9/11, offered to loosen those rules even further, and the administration said, no, don't loosen the rules. Don't loosen the rules, and then they proceeded to break the rules because they said the rules were too rigid. It's like somebody saying, would you like to loosen your tie? And you say, no, give me a scissors because I'm going to cut the tie off my neck, it's too tight.